Hi, I'm John Stevenson. We're going to be looking at Judges chapters 17 and 18 in our continuing study of the Old Testament historical books. Seen the outline of the historical books, starting in the first two chapters with a prologue in two parts, and then went into the Judges. First of all, a very short narrative of Othniel, the Ehud story. He's a social outcast, bound in his right hand with oppressors from the east side of the Jordan. There's the Deborah and Barak narrative, where a woman, not Deborah, but Jael, slays the enemy of God's people with a blow to the head. And the pivotal point in the whole story of Judges is the Gideon story. Next, we have another woman. This time she's unnamed, and Abimelech, the son of Gideon, he's the villain, and he is killed by a woman with a blow to the head again. We have another social outcast. This time it's Jephthah. Again, there's oppressors from the east side of the Jordan. We have one more narrative, Samson. Now, this is quite lengthy. So Othniel was very short. Samson is a few chapters. And then we come where we're at today with an epilogue in two parts. We're only going to look at the first of those two parts, so fairly short class. We begin in Judges chapter 17 and verse 1. Now there was a man of the hill country of Ephraim. Ephraim has actually been in quite a bit of these stories, whose name was Micah. He said to his mother, "The 1,100 pieces of silver which were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse in my hearing, behold, the silver is with me." Notice, he's the one who had stolen it. His mother had put a curse on whoever it was that stolen it, not knowing, or maybe she did suspect. I don't know if she realized it was him, but now he confesses, "I took it." And his mother said, "Blessed be my son by the Lord." So she takes away the curse and now puts a blessing upon him. Verse 3, he then returned the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother, and his mother said, "I wholly dedicate the silver from my hand to the Lord for my son." So far, that's so good. Dedicating money to the Lord is okay. They didn't actually have coins, so silver was actually just uncut, or unfashioned, I should say. But notice, "I wholly dedicate the silver from my hand to the Lord for my son to make a graven image." Now, graven images weren't something that they were supposed to be making. So when he returned the silver to his mother took 200 pieces of silver, gave them to the silversmith, who made them into a graven image and a molten image, two different ways of describing the same thing. In other words, this is an idol. This is a pagan representation. They weren't supposed to be doing that. They're saying, "Well, we're doing that to worship the Lord," but you're not supposed to be worshiping the Lord with an idol. And they were in the house of Micah, or Micah, however you want to pronounce his name. They're engaged in idol worship as a way to approach the Lord, but that's an improper way. Verse 5, and the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and a household idols. Remember how Gideon had a ephod made, and I don't know that he intended it to be engaged in idol worship, but it had led to that. Same thing here. And consecrated one of his sons that he might become his priest. So Micah makes a son into a priest. This is not somebody from the tribe of Levi. This is not somebody who's ordained by God to be a priest, but this is sort of do-it-yourself religion. And so notice a shrine. The term here, Beth Elohim. Beth is the word for house, or Ba'ith. Elohim is the word for God. So a house of God. But it's really not a house of God. He's turned it into sort of a joke. That's not the way you're supposed to worship God. Verse 6, in those days there was no king in Israel. This is part of the problem. And this is also going to be the refrain of both this section and the next section, the repeated refrain. In those days there was no king in Israel. Now, when you say that, we already noted before that by the time this is being written, there are kings in Israel, but back then there weren't any. And here's the result of that. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. Is that a good thing? No, it's not. Instead of obeying the Lord, they're doing their own thing, as in the case of Micah. So this is going to be our continuing refrain. Let's continue. Verse 7, now there was a young man from Bethlehem. And so we started off in Ephraim to the north, sort of in central Canaan. Now we're going to go to this little tiny town, and it was back then a very little tiny town, even in the days of Jesus, 1,000 years later, it's still going to be a tiny town. But Bethlehem, the term Bethlehem means house of bread. It's in the tribe allocated to Judah, of the family of Judah, and there was a Levite, and he was staying there. So a Levite is staying in Bethlehem. But then the man departed from the city, from Bethlehem in Judah, to stay wherever he might find, and our translators have added a place. He goes out looking for something. I'm not even sure if he knew what he was looking for. He was tired of being a Levite, and he wanted to advance himself, so he goes out seeking his fortune. And he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. So what happens is he meets Micah, and Micah says, "How would you like a job? I've got one of my sons is a priest, but he doesn't really know anything about being a priest. But you're a Levite. How would you like a promotion? Instead of being a simple old Levite, you can actually become a priest." Now, let me say, not all Levites were priests, although all priests were Levite if they were godly, the priests that God had ordained. And so Micah figures, I'm going to get the sort of priest that was ordained by God. We're going to get a little bit closer to the truth. Although this man, as far as we can tell, wasn't himself a priest. He was only a Levite, but he's going to get promoted from being a Levite to a priest. So Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest, sort of a personal religious priest, and lived in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord will prosper me, seeing I have a Levite as a priest." Now, there's a little bit of arrogance here, because he's saying, if I get a little bit closer to the truth, and I'm not there, I still have idols, and I'm not supposed to be doing any of that, but at least I got a little closer to religious tradition, and that's going to make God prosper me. And notice he's not saying may Baal or Dagon or some other pagan god. He says he's worshiping God, but he's still not worshiping God the way he's supposed to be. Chapter 18, verse 1, in those days, there's our refrain again, there was no king in Israel. That's part of the problem. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites, remember Dan was one of the sons of Jacob. So we have a tribe based upon those people. The tribe of Danites was seeking an inheritance for themselves to live in. Now, notice where Dan is located, and I haven't put very real specific geographical boundaries because, let me just say, the boundaries back then were a little fluid. But Dan is located, notice, in the southwestern area. Somebody who's also in the southwestern area of Canaan were the Philistines. Now, the Philistines are on the coast. Dan is not right on the coast, but inland on the Shephelah and maybe a little bit on the mountains. For until that day, an inheritance had not been allotted to them as a possession among the tribes of Israel. They were sort of semi-homeless. Now, when it says that it hadn't been allotted to them, they had an area, but there were other people living in the area, and it was contested. So there's our refrain. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Chapter 18, verse 2, so the sons of Dan sent from their family 5 men out of their whole number, valiant men from Zorah and Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to search it. It's like almost going back to the days of Joshua. They're not sending out 2 or 12, they're sending out 5. And they said to them, go search the land, look for another inheritance, not the inheritance that God gave, but some other inheritance, because in those days there's no king in Israel, and everybody's sort of doing their own thing, and they are too. Rest of verse 2, and they came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. Now, Ephraim's already got that territory, so they're not going to get any territory there, but they stay with Micah for a short time, and they're going to go there. They're going to continue on their journey. Verse 6, the priest said to them, go in peace, your way in which you're going has the Lord's approval. Now, had God approved this, or is the priest merely telling them what they want to hear? I suspect it's the latter. He's a priest, not a prophet. A priest is one who represents the people to God. A prophet is the one who represents God to the people. This priest, as far as we know, has no spiritual insight. If he had, maybe he would have stayed as a Levite. Maybe he would have been trying to up his promotional career. And instead, he has gone out to do his own thing, and evidently, he's speaking his own thing. Verse 7, then the 5 men departed and came, and they're going to go north to Laish. Now, Laish is as far north as you can go and still be in the land of that portion of Canaan. There's portions of Canaan that are further north along the coast. I think the Phoenicians, they're a branch of the Canaanites. But when Israel becomes a nation, Laish will be right on the northern border. Although by that time, we're going to see a name change to the place. So 5 men departed, came to Laish, saw the people who were in it living in security, after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure. Sidonians are one of the other branches of the Canaanites, one of the Phoenician branches. There's going to be a city by the name of Sidon or Sidon, up in modern day Lebanon, and that's going to be a Phoenician city, a city that hosts harbors and ships. And the Phoenicians, let me just say, the Phoenicians were an ocean-going people. The Jews were not. And so they have very different interests. But here's some folk that are not on the ocean, and yet their manner of living, maybe their religion, their culture, is solidly Phoenician. For there was no ruler humiliating them for anything in the land. Notice they did not have a king over them. And as a result of not having a king, they don't have to pay taxes, they don't have to be subjected, and they were far from the Sidonians and had no dealings with anyone. They found a place of their own out in the middle of nowhere. There are mountains to the north, the east, the south, well, not so much to the south, and the west. The south is wide open. You have that big, wide Jordan River Valley that starts there and works its way all the way down to the Dead Sea. We actually have found the city of Laish. You're looking, now this is an old picture. If you go there today, they've taken away that scaffolding, they've excavated. This is the original gate, or at least one of the gates. I think there's only one there, the gate to the city. It's today something like 4,000 years old. So that's a very, very, not quite, maybe a little bit, maybe only about 3,700, something like that. But it's an ancient city. And as I said, they found it. As we said, there was no ruler there. The Sidonians didn't have any dealings with them because of the mountains. And now this group of Dan, they go back home. They go back to Dan, and they report, and they decide that would be a great place to live. Let's go live up there. And so on their travels, they returned to the house of Micah. After all, that was on their way, coming back and going forward. And they see those graven images that he had. Remember the silver that had been fashioned into a idol. And they say, gee, one thing we could use, let's take some idols with us. Now, why are they doing that? Well, they're thinking the priest gave us some prophecies, and look at that, we're about to prosper. So his prophecy really did work. They're assuming maybe these idols were good luck charms, and so they decide to raid his little homemade temple and take the statues of the gods with them. And when the Levitical priest, remember he's a Levite turned priest, he says, "Wait a minute, those don't belong to you." They say, "How would you like a job?" And so they offer the priest, quote unquote, a position with them. Instead of being a house priest for the tribe of Micah, you can be a priest for an entire tribe. How would you like to have a positive career move? And the priest, after all, he seems to have been in it for the position and maybe the money, the financial security. That sounds like a good thing. You know, I've had a calling from God, and so he says, and he decides to go with him. And Micah says, "Wait a minute, those are my idols and my priests." And they said, "You better hush up, or else we're going to take you out. Not with us, but we're going to take you out. We're going to kill you." And they threaten him, and they go on their way, because in those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone was doing their own thing, and that was not a good thing. So they go up to Laish, they conquer it, and they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan, their father, who was born in Israel. That is the tribe of Dan. However, the name of the city formerly was Laish, but now it's going to be Dan. And we'll see Dan having an impact on future generations. Let me just say, when we get finally to the days of the divided kingdom, Dan will be a place where there's a pagan temple. You say pagan temple? Well, actually, it's going to be a temple dedicated supposedly to God, but with idols in it. Where do you get that from? And so it's going downhill now, and that will leave a bad legacy for this place in the future. Now, Judges chapter 18, verses 30 and 31, the sons of Dan set up for themselves the graven image. And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. When's the day of the captivity? That's when, well, the northern kingdom is going to be taken into captivity in the year 721 BC. It might be refer to that. The southern kingdom won't be taken into captivity until the year 586 BC. That'll be Babylon, but that's only going to be the south. So this is probably the Assyrian captivity. Verse 31, so they set up for themselves Micah's graven image, which he had made, all the time that the house of God was at Shiloh, or sometimes you want to pronounce that Shiloh. But Shiloh is a place where the tabernacle had been set up. That's down in central Canaan. But they have abandoned that worship. They have abandoned the tabernacle. They have abandoned the Ark of the Covenant, and they're doing their own thing, their own, can I call it this, their own denomination. That wasn't positive. That's not a good move. And so our story comes to a close. There was no king in Israel, and everyone was doing their own thing. And they needed, can I say it? They needed a king from Bethlehem. But we'll see that more in the next lesson.